हाय माई सेल्फ मीनू और हम लोग आज करने वाले हैं लेटर वैदिक पीरियड के बारे में। सो एक्सपेंशन इन लेटर वैदिक पीरियड दिस स्टार्ट्स फ्रॉम 1000 से 500 BC तक एंड द हिस्ट्री ऑफ द लेटर वैदिक पीरियड इज बेस्ड मेनली ऑन वैदिक टेक्स्ट। तो जो वैदिक पीरियड की हिस्ट्री है वो मेनली किस पे बेस्ड है, वैदिक टेक्स्ट पे, विच वर कंपाइल्ड आफ्टर एज ऑफ ऋग्वेद एंड द कलेक्शंस ऑफ द वैदिक हाइमन्स एंड मंत्रास वर नोन एज द संहितास। तो जो हिस्ट्री है बाद वाली वैदिक पीरियड के, तो उसको लेटर वैदिक पीरियड बोलते हैं, जिसमें मेनली वैदिक टेक्स्ट का कंपाइल हुआ था आफ्टर एज ऑफ ऋग्वेद एंड कलेक्शन ऑफ वैदिक हाइमन्स एंड मंत्रास वर नोन एज संहितास। जो कलेक्शन है वैदिक हाइमन्स और मंत्रास का उसको संहिता बोलते हैं। एंड फॉर पर्पजेस of recitation the prayers of Rig Veda were set to tune and this modified collection was known as the सामवेद संहिता। तो ये जो पर्पज है रेसिटेशन का, प्रेयर्स का, ऋग्वेद का, वो वर सेट टू ट्यून एंड दिस मॉडिफाइड कलेक्शन वाज नोन एज द सामवेद संहिता। एंड लेटर वैदिक पीरियड के बारे में देख लेते हैं 1100 से 500 BC तक। सो दिस इज़ द एरिया गंधारी एंड उत्तरा माद्रा एंड सिंधु सवेरा से लेके ये पूरा है। तो ऐसे है। इन एडिशन टू द सामवेद इन द पोस्ट ऋग्वेदिक टाइम्स two other collections. In the edition of Samved in post-Rigvedic times, two other collections were composed. These were the Yajurveda Samhita and Atharvaveda Samhita. And Yajurveda contains not only hymns but also rituals which have to accompany their recitation, and the Atharvaveda contains charms and spells to ward off evils and diseases, and the Vedic Samhitas were followed by the composition of a series of texts known as the Brahmanas, and these were full of ritualistic formulae and explain the social रिलीजियस मीनिंग ऑफ रिचुअल्स। ठीक है, तो इसमें बोल रहे हैं कि सामवेद में पोस्ट ऋग्वेदिक टाइम्स में टू अदर कलेक्शंस हुए थे कंपोज, जिनको कहते हैं यजुर्वेद संहिता एंड अथर्ववेद संहिता। एंड यजुर्वेद कंटेन करता है ना सिर्फ हाइमन्स को बट ऑल्सो रिचुअल्स विच हैव टू अकम्पनाई दियर रेसिटेशन, एंड अथर्ववेद contains charms and spells to ward off evils and diseases, and Vedic Samhitas were followed by composition of series of text जिसको कहते हैं ब्राह्मणास, and these are full of ritualistic formulae and explains the social and religious meaning of rituals. So all these later Vedic texts were compiled in the upper Gangetic basins इन circa 1000 to 500 BC। तो ये सब कंपाइलमेंट कब हुई? अपर गंगेटिक बेसिन में हुई। एंड कहाँ पे कब हुई? 1000 से 500 BC के बीच में। एंड कॉल्ड पेंटेड ग्रे वेयर sites because they were inhabited by people who used earthen bowls and dishes made of painted grey pottery, and they were inhabited by people जो कि है यूज होते हैं earthen bowls and dishes made of painted grey pottery, and they also used iron weapons. With the combined evidence from the later Vedic text and PZW iron phase archaeology, we can form an idea of the life of the people in the first half of the first millennium BC in western Uttar Pradesh and adjoining areas of Punjab, Haryana and Rajasthan। ठीक है, तो ये सब का कहलाते हैं पेंटेड ग्रे वेयर साइट्स जहाँ पे इनहेबिटेड मिले हैं पीपल हु यूज टू अर्न बाउल्स डिशेज एंड पेंटेड ग्रे पॉटरी दे ऑल्सो कॉल्ड आयरन वेपन्स एंड विद द combined evidences from the later Vedic text and painted grey where iron phase archaeology we can form an idea of the life of the people in the first half of the first millennium BC in western Uttar Pradesh adjoining areas of Punjab, Haryana and Rajasthan. So here is the painted grey ware cultures, and the text show that the Aryans expanded from Punjab over the whole of the western Uttar Pradesh covered. जो टेक्स्ट है वो दिखाते हैं कि आर्यंस पंजाब से शुरू होकर वेस्टर्न यूपी तक थे, कवर्ड बाई गंगा यमुना दोआब एंड द Bharatas and Purus and the two major tribes combined and thus formed the Ram people, and in the beginning they lived between the Saraswati and the Drishdavati just on the fringe of the Doab. Soon Kurus occupied Delhi and upper portion of the Doab, the area called Kurukshetra or the land of Kurus. Gradually they caused and with the people called the Panchals who occupied the middle portion of the Doab. ठीक है. And the authority of the Kuru Panchala people spread over Delhi. तो जो अथॉरिटी है कुरु पंचाल की people spread over Delhi and the upper middle portion of the Doab, and authority of the Kuru Panchal people spread over Delhi and the upper middle parts of the Doab, and they set up their capital at Hastinapur situated in the district of Meerut, and the history of Kuru tribe is important for the battle of Bharat, and which is the main theme of the great epic called the Mahabharata. This war is supposed to have been fought around 950 BC between the Kauravas and the Pandavas. तो देखिए अथॉरिटी ऑफ कुरु पांचाल पीपल की क्या थी, स्प्रेड ओवर दिल्ली हुई एंड द अपर एंड मिडिल पोर्शन ऑफ द दोआब, एंड अथॉरिटी ऑफ कुरु पांचाल people spread over Delhi upper and middle parts of the Doab and their capital at Hastinapur situated at the district of Meerut, and history of the Kuru tribe is important for the battle of Bharat, and which is the main theme of great epic called Mahabharata. This war supposed to have been fought around 950 BC between Kauravas and Pandavas, although both of them belonged to Kuru clan. As a result, practically the whole of the Kuru clan was wiped out, and towards the end of later Vedic period around 600 BC, Vedic people spread from board further east of Kausal and eastern Uttar Pradesh and within and north Bihar. Although Kausal is associated with the story of Rama, it is not mentioned in Vedic literature. So ऑल्दो कौशल इज जो कौशल है मतलब अयोध्या का एरिया वो एसोसिएटेड है राम जी के साथ, एंड ये मेंशन नहीं किया गया वैदिक लिटरेचर में. एंड UGW सो आयरन फेज कल्चर एंड लेटर वैदिक इकोनॉमी. अराउंड 1000 BC आयरन अपीयर्स इन धारवाड़ डिस्ट्रिक्ट इन कर्नाटका. सो 1000 BC के अराउंड तो आयरन है अपीयर होता है धारवाड़ डिस्ट्रिक्ट में इन कर्नाटका में. एक्सकवेशन होते हैं एंड दैट आयरन वेपन्स सच एज एरो हेड्स एंड स्पीयर हेड्स केम आउट टू commonly used to in western Uttar Pradesh from about 800 BC onwards. With iron weapons, the Vedic people may have defeated the few adversaries that may have faced them in upper portion of the Doab. So towards the end of the Vedic period, knowledge of iron spread in eastern Uttar Pradesh and Videha, and earliest iron implements discovered in the area belong to the 7th century BC, and the metal itself is called Syama or Krishna Ayas in the later Vedic text. तो 1000 BC के अराउंड आयरन अपीयर हुआ इन धारवाड़ डिस्ट्रिक्ट कर्नाटका में. एक्सकेवेशंस दिखाते हैं कि आयरन वेपन सच एज एरो हेड एंड स्पीयर हेड्स जो कि कॉमनली यूज होते हैं वेस्टर्न उत्तर प्रदेश में 800 BC के अराउंड. एंड विद आयरन वेपन्स द वैदिक पीपल मे हैव डिफीटेड द फ्यू एडवर्सरीज that may have faced them in upper portion of the Doab. And towards the end of Vedic period, knowledge of iron spread in eastern Uttar Pradesh and Vidya, and earliest iron implements discovered in this area belong to the 7th century, and metal itself is called Syam or Krishna Ayas in the later Vedic text. Although very few agricultural tools made up of iron have been found, undoubtedly agriculture was cheap main मतलब means livelihood का of the later Vedic period. And Satpatha Brahman speak at length about of the plough in rituals, and according to ancient legends, Janak, the king of Videha and father of Sita, lent his hand to the plough, and in later times ploughing came to be prohibited for the members of the upper Varnas, and the Vedic people continued to produce barley, but during this period rice, wheat became their cheap crops. वैदिक पीरियड में बारले उगा रहे थे, लेकिन इस पीरियड में लेटर वैदिक में राइस एंड वीट चीप क्रॉप्स बन गई थी. इन सब्सिक्वेंट टाइम्स वीट became the staple food of the people in Punjab and western Uttar Pradesh. For the first time of the Vedic people came to be acquainted with rice in the Doab. It is called Vrihi in the Vedic text and remains recovered from Hastinapur, belongs to the 8th century BC, and use of rice is recommended in Vedic rituals, but that of wheat only rarely. So agriculture and various crafts enable the later Vedic people to lead a settled life, and excavations and explorations give us some idea about settlements in later Vedic times. And widespread painted graveyard sites are found not only in western Uttar Pradesh and Delhi, which was the Kuru Panchals area, but also in the adjoining paras of Punjab and Haryana, which was the Madras area in those Rajasthan, which was the Matsya area, also Matsya, and also we can quote nearly 700 cities, mostly belonging to the upper Gangetic basins. So the term Nagar is used in later Vedic text. We can trace only the faint beginnings of towns towards the end of later Vedic period, and Hastinapur and Kausambi near Allahabad can be regarded as primitive towns belonging to the end of Vedic period, and they may be called proto-urban sites. तो इसमें जो नागर टर्म है वो लेटर वैदिक टेक्स्ट में आपको देखने को मिलता है. ओनली द फैंट बिगनिंग्स ऑफ टाउन्स टू नगर जो कहते हैं ना टाउन्स के लिए, फैंट बिगनिंग्स ऑफ टाउन्स टुवर्ड्स द एंड ऑफ लेटर वैदिक पीरियड में. एंड हस्तिनापुर एंड कौसाम्बी नियर अलाहाबाद कैन बी रिगार्डेड एज द प्रिमिटिव टाउन्स बिलोंगिंग टू द एंड ऑफ वैदिक पीरियड, एंड दे मे बी कॉल्ड एज प्रोटो अर्बन सिटीज़. एंड पॉलिटिकल ऑर्गेनाइजेशन देख लेते हैं. इन लेटर वैदिक टाइम्स ऋग वैदिक पीपल असेंबलीज लॉस्ट इम्पोर्टेंस एंड रॉयल पावर इंक्रीज एट, रॉयल पावर जो हुई वो आपकी इंक्रीज हुई एट द Vidhata. At their cost, Vidhata completely disappeared. Sabha and Samiti continued to hold grounds, but their character changed. They came to be dominated by chief and rich nobles. Women were no longer permitted to sit on the Sabha, and it was now dominated by nobles and Brahmins. ठीक है. And political organization. Many tribes, janas leads by rajans, each jana many villages, grams, and each grams many families. Leader of gram was Gramini village headman. So the formation of bigger kingdoms made the chief or the king more powerful. Tribal authority tended to become territorial. Princes or chiefs ruled over tribes, but the dominant tribes give their names to territories which might be inhabited by tribes other than their own. In the beginning, each area was named after the tribe and which settled there first, and at the first Panchal was name of people, and then it became the name of a region. Yeah. And the term Rashtra was indicates territory first appears in this period. राष्ट्र जो बोलते हैं ये टेरिटरी को इंडिकेट करता है जो कि इस पीरियड में आया था ये टर्म. एंड ट्रेसेस द इलेक्शन ऑफ द चीफ और द किंग अपीयर्स इन लेटर वैदिक टेक्स्ट. जो ट्रेसेस हैं इलेक्शन के या चीफ ऑफ द किंग्स के जो अपीयर होते हैं लेटर वैदिक पीरियड टेक्स्ट में. एंड अदर क्वालिटीज वॉज elected Raja, and he received voluntary presents called Bali from his ordinary kingsmen or common people called Vis, and but the chief tried to perpetuate the right to receive presents and enjoy the other privileges pertaining to his office by making it hereditary in his family. The post generally went to eldest son. However, this succession was not only always smooth. The king's influence was strengthened by rituals. He performed the Rasuya sacrifice, which was supposed to confer supreme power on him. He performed the Aswamedh, which meant unquestioned control over an area in which the royal horse ran uninterrupted. He also performed the Vajpayee or chariot race, in which royal chariot was made to win a race against his kingsmen, and all the rituals impressed the people with the increasing power and prestige of the king. And during this period, collection of taxes and tributes seems to have become common. They were probably deposited with an officer called Sangrihistri, and in the discharge of his duties, the king was assisted by the priest and commander-in-chief, queen, and a few other high functionaries. At the lower level, an administration was possibly carried on the village assemblies, which may have been controlled by the chief of the dominant clan. And social organization को देख लेते हैं. Later Vedic period came to be divided by 4 varnas called the Brahmans, Rajanyas or Kshatriya, Vaisya or Sudras. The growing cult of sacrifice enormously added to the power of Brahmins, Kshatriya, Vaisya, Sudra, and untouchables. So out of caste, street sweepers, latrine cleaners, untouchables, and इनको आउट ऑफ कास्ट रखा गया. कॉमनरीज, पीजेंट्स एंड सर्वेंट्स को शूद्र में रखा. एंड मर्चेंट्स एंड लैंड ओनर्स, वैश्य, क्षत्रिय, वॉरियर्स एंड किंग्स, ब्राह्मण, प्रीस्ट एंड academics. Okay, the Vaisya constituted the common people, and they were assisted to do the producing functions such as agriculture, cattle breeding, etc. Some of them so worked as artisans. Towards the end of the Vedic period, they began to engage in trade, and the Vaisyas appear to be only tribute prayers in later Vedic times, and Brahmins and Kshatris are represented as living on the tributes collected from the West, and this was done with the help of priests who also fattened at the cost of the people or the Vaisyas. All the three higher varnas shared a common feature. One common feature, they were entitled to Upanayan or investiture with the sacred thread according to the Vedic mantras, and the fourth varna was deprived of sacred thread ceremony and recitation of the Gayatri mantra, and with this began the imposition of disabilities on the Sudras. So, generally, in the later Vedic text, draw a line of demarcation between the three higher orders on the one hand and the Sudras on the other hand. So there were nevertheless several public rituals connected with the coronation of the king in which the Sudras participated, presumably as survivors of the original Aryan people. Certain sections of artisans such as Rathakara or chariot maker enjoyed a high status and were entitled to the sacred thread ceremony, and therefore even in later Vedic times Varna distinction had not advanced very far. In the family, we noticed the increasing power of the father, who could even disinherit his son. In princely families, the right of primogeniture was getting stronger. Male ancestor came to be worshipped, and women were generally given a lower position. Although some women theologians took part in philosophic discussions, some queens participated in the coronation rituals. Ordinarily, women were thought to be inferior and subordinate to men. So the institution of Gotra appeared in later Vedic period, and literally it means cow pen, and the place where cattle belonging to the whole clan are kept, and but in courts of time signified descent from a common ancestor. So people began to practice Gotra exogamy, and no marriage could take place between persons belonging to the same Gotra and having the same lineage. And ashramas, or four stages of life, were not well established in Vedic times. In the post Vedic text, we hear the four ashramas, that brahmachari or student, grahastha householder, vanaprastha hermit, and sannyasi is the ascetic who completely renounced the worldly life. And first three are mentioned in the later Vedic text, and the last fourth stage had not been well established in later Vedic times, though ascetic life was not unknown. And even in post Vedic times, only the stage of householder was commonly practiced by all the Varnas. So, good rituals and philosophy. The two outstanding Rigvedic gods, Indra and Agni, lost their former importance. On the other hand, Prajapati and Creator came to occupy the supreme position in the later Vedic pantheon. So, some of the other minor gods of the Rigvedic times also came to the forefront. Rudras of the god of animals became important in later Vedic times, and Vishnu came to be conceived as the preserver and protector of the people. And in addition, some objects began to worship as symbol of divinity, and signs of idolatry appears in later Vedic. And Pushan, who was supposed to look after cattle, came to be regarded as the god of Sudras, and people perceived gods for the same material reasons in this period as they did in earlier times. So, however, the mode of worship changed considerably, and prayers continued to be recited. Sacrifices became far more important, and they assumed both public and domestic character, and sacrifices involved the killing of animals on a large scale, and especially the destruction of cattle wealth. And the guest was known as Goghana, or one who was fed on cattle, and sacrifices were accompanied by formula which had to be carefully pronounced by sacrificer, and the sacrificer was known as the Yajamana and the performer of Yajana, and much of his success depended on the magical power of words uttered correctly in the sacrifices. So, in addition to cows, which were usually given as sacrificial gifts, gold cloth horses were also given. Sometimes the priests claimed portions of territory as Dakshina, and Satapatha Brahman states that in the Assamedh, north, south, east, west, all should be given to the priest. And towards in the end of the Vedic period began a strong reaction against the priestly domination and against cults and rituals, especially in the land of the Panchals and Videha, and they were around 600 BC, and Upanishads were compiled. These philosophical texts criticized the rituals and laid stress on the value of right belief and knowledge. They emphasized that the knowledge of self and Atma should be acquired, and relation of Atma with Brahma should be properly understood. So here we done with this later Vedic period. So till then, like, share and subscribe, follow for the more.